And 100 years after the worst massacre in Black American history, survivors in Tulsa remember the day their town was burned down. It's the worst massacre in Black American history, exactly 100 years ago today. Yet the slaughter of up to 300 African Americans in Tulsa, Oklahoma in 1921 wasn't taught in local schools until just 20 years ago. Sparked by claims of an assault by a black man on a white teenager, a white mob rampaged through the affluent Greenwood area of the city, shooting, burning and looting. A handful of survivors who lost everything are still waiting for compensation. This report from Gary O'Donoghue contains some images you may find distressing.
Before the destruction, they called it Black Wall Street. But in just 18 hours, a murderous white mob had razed a thriving black community to the ground, making 10,000 people homeless, with up to 300 black lives lost. Few dispute that it was the worst single act of racial violence in the history of the United States.
I will never forget the violence of the white mob when we left our home. I still see black men being shot, black bodies lying in the street. I still smell smoke and see fire.
Because of the massacre, my family was driven out of our home. We were left with nothing.
So here is the basement room where people hid in.
And how many do you think came down here?
At least a few hundred.
Robert Turner is the Reverend at the Vernon AME Church. It was one of several burned to the ground during the massacre. The church was rebuilt with parishioners' money as the insurers refused to pay out.
After the massacre, there was this movement by the white community to not ever talk about it because they knew they had gotten away with murder. They didn't want to ever bring it up, and any of the black people who brought it up, they were either killed, run out of town, or intimidated into silence.
Not a single person was prosecuted for the murders, for the looting, or for the arson. Not one black family received a penny in compensation. It would take 75 years for there to be any official recognition that a massacre had taken place at all. While Tulsa unites to mark the massacre, there are divisions. That's meant the cancellation of a major concert, the survivors at odds with the city over who should pay them reparations.
The centennial is not about concerts, it's not about speeches, it's not about interviews. It is about focusing on the people that were harmed and doing everything in our power to make sure those people receive justice, respect, and reparations.
But while the survivors continue their fight for compensation, some among the younger generation are finding the history just too much to cope with.
It is so painful that I can't even live in this city. I just can't. But I have since moved to Atlanta, Georgia, which I consider to be, the new Black Wall Street.
When the president comes here tomorrow, he will yet again address a shameful episode in the country's history. And with the murder of George Floyd still uppermost, many will wonder just how much has really changed in America over the past 100 years. Gary O'Donoghue, BBC News, Tulsa.